This announcement is not the grand reopening the industry was looking for, but after months of travel restrictions, the easing looks likely to take time. Caroline Davis, BBC News.
You're watching BBC News. We have just received a statement from Buckingham Palace confirming that the Duke of Edinburgh has died. The statement says, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen has announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle." We have just received this information from Buckingham Palace. Let me repeat this news. "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen has announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle." In recent years, we know that the Duke was rarely seen in public. His last scheduled appearance was at Windsor Castle in July 2020, after which time he pretty much retired from public life. That had been his first official engagement in more than a year. And it came as Prince Philip handed over patronage of the rifles to Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall. He had held the title of Colonel-in-Chief since 2007. But his connection to the infantry regiment stretched back to 1954. 4 of its officers came to Windsor Castle to mark the occasion and to thank him for decades of service. We know, of course, that the Duke had struggled with various health problems in recent times and had been in hospital for several weeks only a short time ago. And Prince Charles, on one occasion, had visited him. He was in a private hospital to begin with and then received treatment in an NHS hospital before he returned home. But sadly, we now learn of his death via that statement from Buckingham Palace, just received in the last few minutes. The statement says, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen has announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle." Well, the Duke largely retired from his royal duties, as we know, in August 2017. He signed off at Buckingham Palace with the Royal Marines. He had been their Captain General for nearly 65 years. Prince Philip's own military career in the Royal Navy saw active service during the Second World War, but that ended after his wife's coronation in 1953. He dedicated himself to supporting the Queen in her work. The parade was the last of the Duke's 22,000 solo public engagements, a great support all those years to Her Majesty the Queen. Away from the military, he was president or patron of more than 750 organisations, many of them involved with the protection of the environment and the encouragement of sport. He was by far the longest serving consort to a monarch in British history. Let's just remind you of that statement released in the last few minutes from Buckingham Palace. It says, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen has announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle." We are interrupting our normal programmes to bring you an important announcement. You're watching BBC News from London. A short while ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. In a statement, the Palace said, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss. BBC Television is broadcasting this special programme reporting the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. You're watching BBC News. A short while ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. In a statement, the palace said, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen has announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss." BBC Television is broadcasting this special programme. Now, Prince Philip was the longest-serving royal consort in British history. He was at the Queen's side for more than 70 years. He held a central role in British public life, loyally representing the Queen at home and abroad, and supporting the monarch in all of her duties. The Duke had served in the Royal Navy before embracing royal duties full-time when his wife became Queen in 1952. He was Her Majesty's closest advisor, responsible for modernising aspects of royal life, making the family more accessible and less formal in its ways. Philip led a remarkably active life, supporting hundreds of charities, campaigning for nature conservation, promoting leadership and encouraging young people to test their abilities in the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme. During his long life, he maintained a close bond with the armed services, especially the Royal Navy, and encouraged his children and grandchildren to serve as he had done. Philip was known for his outspoken style and sometimes his controversial wit, and could be relied upon to speak his mind, even on difficult issues. With Philip's death, the royal household has lost a dominant figure. Her Majesty has lost a husband, and British public life has lost a powerful presence, a man whose momentous life spanned a century. Let's just remind you of the statement that has been issued in the last few minutes from Buckingham Palace. It says, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen has announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle." Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell joins us now on the line. Nicholas, a long life now ended, devoted to service to the Queen and the country.
Yes, a life of service alongside his wife, as you say. 2 months and 1 day short of what would have been his 100th birthday, a milestone that he was so determined to reach and for which the royal family would have gathered in celebration at Windsor Castle. Not a surprise, given his age, given the fact that just over a month ago, of course, he was in hospital for a month. He underwent some heart surgical procedure, but he left hospital looking frail, but returning to Windsor Castle to spend these last weeks with his wife, the Queen. And this is a huge blow for her, as indeed it is for any spouse, leaving losing a partner with whom they have been for more than 70 years, 73 years, a greater span of years than most of us have been alive. So a huge blow for the Queen, and it is fair to say, I think, that in so many ways the success and the stability of her reign owes a great deal to the success and the stability of their marriage. He was the person to whom she could always turn, the private support which was so invaluable in the isolated position, the lonely position as head of state. It's a huge loss for the royal family. For so long, he was the dominant figure in the family's domestic life, an important source of advice and support for those who married into the royal family, as he did, for William and Harry in their military careers, and for all that he was noted and will be remembered for his abrasiveness. There was also a much more sensitive side to his personality, and that became apparent in the advice that he gave to younger members of the royal family, the advice that he attempted to give to Diana, Princess of Wales, when it was clear that her marriage was failing. And there is a gap in our national life now. For so many years, he made a huge and significant contribution, not just to the success of the Queen's reign, but in his own right. He had to find a niche for himself in the nation's life, and he did that. So a little colour has left the national stage today. He was much more than the rather gaffe-prone, foot-in-the-mouth caricature, as he was so often presented. A man who made a contribution in his own right, but whose greatest contribution was in the support that he gave to his wife, the Queen.
And let's just, before we move on, Nicholas, stay with us if you would. I just would like to read again that statement that's been issued in the last few minutes from Buckingham Palace. It says, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen has announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss." BBC Television is broadcasting this special programme reporting the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, is here. And as you say, a very long-serving consort, the longest-serving that we've seen. But before he married the Queen, he had a very distinguished naval career, Nick.
Yes, and there are those who feel that he could have risen to very senior rank within the Royal Navy. And of course, it was one of the frustrations that he faced in the 1950s, that he had to give up that naval career. I mean, this is a man who was naturally a dominant personality, a commander, and yet he had to take the subservient role, if you like, in second place, behind the Queen. And he did undoubtedly find that difficult back in the 1950s. He had to adapt. He had to find a role for himself. There was no constitutional significance. He was never Prince Consort. He was never able to see state papers or involve himself in that business, his wife, the Queen's business. So that added to the frustration that he felt in the 1950s. There was a young Queen on the throne, surrounded by experienced courtiers who were suspicious of this young husband who was something of a modernizer in royal terms, and he did then struggle a little with that. He found it difficult, but he found a role for himself. He could be contrary, he could be disputatious, and you have to remember that this was a man with a sharp mind, intellectually very curious, a sharp mind, and of course sometimes a sharp tongue. He could be abrasive and difficult, but it was through that, with this intellectual curiosity, that he developed areas of expertise and of curiosity, areas in which he took a particular interest. He was one of the pioneers of the environmental movement, the first president of what was then the World Wildlife Fund. He set up the Duke of Edinburgh's Award. That perhaps is the one entity for which he will be most remembered, giving so many thousands of, indeed hundreds of thousands of young people an opportunity to experience aspects of life that hitherto had been denied to them. He was a resilient personality, self-sufficient, and that, of course, was rooted in the rootless childhood that he had. He came of royal blood from European royalty, and he was adaptable. And he called on all of those qualities to fashion a route for himself through those difficult days in the 1950s, finding a role for himself and settling into that role of support alongside the Queen.
Yes, he once said that it was all rather trial and error in that role to begin with, finding a way to support the Queen as her consort, and having to devise his own ways of making a contribution to national life. And there were so many thousands of engagements, many of which, of course, we wouldn't have even been aware of, but he had an extremely busy calendar before he retired.
Yes, one of the busiest members of the royal family until his retirement from active royal duty in 2017 at the age of 94 or 95 then. And it was a life, an adult life of service and of duty and of support for the Queen. He made, I think it is reasonable to say, an incalculable contribution to the success of her reign. People who know them both say that she simply could not have done it without him, without this constant source of support to the Queen. Much of it, private support, never witnessed, never seen by the world. But he was the person to whom she could always turn and on whom she could always rely. And that has now gone. Now, it is important to say that there can be no question of the Queen now withdrawing or retiring. She will continue with her role as the UK's head of state. But it is a great loss to her, a moment of great sadness for the Queen to lose her husband of 73 years, the man who has been, as you say, the longest-serving consort in British history.
Nick, for the moment, thank you very much, but do stay with us. Let's remind you of the statement that the Palace has issued today. It says, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss." Camilla Tominey is the former royal editor of the Sunday Express, and she is the current associate editor of the Daily Telegraph. Camilla, thank you very much for joining us. During those 13 years or so that you were the royal editor at the Sunday Express, you travelled many, many times with the Duke of Edinburgh. What are some of the memories that stand out for you?
Good afternoon, and I'm sorry to be here on this sad occasion. Yes, I have fond memories of covering the Duke of Edinburgh's jobs. I travelled to America with him and the Queen back in 2007. They met George W. Bush. Most recently, their last foreign visit was to Berlin, and he was on sparkling form. That was, I believe, in 2015. There was a walkabout in the main city centre, and he was laughing and joking with some medical students about the fact that he didn't believe in seeing doctors or was very stoical. And we know that he would have preferred to have been at home, and that 1 month hospital spell where he did undergo surgery on his heart, obviously a significant step in ensuring that he could be back home for this moment. But even when he was convened back to Windsor Castle in a car and not an ambulance, he was waving to staff who were welcoming in there. A very popular figure behind Palace Gates, famed for the fact that he had a very small turnover of staff. In fact, some employees had been working for him literally for decades. And I reflect as well on what Nick has so eloquently said there of his stalwart support of the Queen. We can't really think of the Queen's reign over the course of nearly 70 years without imagining Philip a couple of steps behind her. And it was like that on jobs. You know, he would almost act as the warm-up man and put people at ease. I know a lot was said about some of his gaffes over the years, but when I observed him at close quarters, he would make a little joke with people just to settle their nerves, because when people meet the Queen, they can be sometimes like rabbits in headlights. So he'd make the odd quip and make sure everyone was quite relaxed. Also, as Nick said there, not someone who really likes small talk. If he was going to say something, he would say something challenging or ask an interesting question, because he didn't just want to do pleasantries. He was always very well briefed before engagements and wanted to interact and engage with the people that both he and the Queen met. I'm sure now...
Camilla, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I need to go to Downing Street to hear the Prime Minister.
It was with great sadness that a short time ago I received word from Buckingham Palace that His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh has passed away at the age of 99. Prince Philip earned the affection of generations here in the United Kingdom, across the Commonwealth and around the world. He was the longest serving consort in history, one of the last surviving people in this country to have served in the Second World War. At Cape Matapan, where he was mentioned in dispatches for bravery, and in the invasion of Sicily, where he saved his ship by his quick thinking. And from that conflict, he took an ethic of service that he applied throughout the unprecedented changes of the post-war era. Like the expert carriage driver that he was, he helped to steer the royal family and the monarchy so that it remains an institution indisputably vital to the balance and happiness of our national life. He was an environmentalist and a champion of the natural world long before it was fashionable. With his Duke of Edinburgh award scheme, he shaped and inspired the lives of countless young people, and at literally tens of thousands of events, he fostered their hopes and encouraged their ambitions. We remember the Duke for all of this, and above all, for his steadfast support for Her Majesty the Queen. Not just as her consort, by her side every day of her reign, but as her husband, her strength and stay of more than 70 years. And it is to Her Majesty and her family that our nation's thoughts must turn today, because they have lost not just a much-loved and highly respected public figure, but a devoted husband and a proud and loving father, grandfather, and in recent years, great-grandfather. Speaking on their golden wedding anniversary, Her Majesty said that our country owed her husband a greater debt than he would ever claim or we shall ever know. And I'm sure that estimate is correct. So we mourn today with Her Majesty the Queen. We offer our condolences to her and to all her family. And we give thanks as a nation and a kingdom for the extraordinary life and work of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
A statement and a tribute from the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, outside number 10 Downing Street. Let's just momentarily go to Buckingham Palace, where the official notification has been placed upon the gates outside the palace with the statement on it that was released by Buckingham Palace just a short time ago. Let's remind you of what it says. It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen has announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Well, the leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, has released a statement. And in it, he says, the United Kingdom has lost an extraordinary public servant in Prince Philip. My thoughts are with the Queen, the royal family, and the British people as our nation comes together to mourn. Let's just take you to Buckingham Palace and see that notice, if we can, of the notification that has been placed upon the gates. I hope we might be able to show that to you in just a moment. This is the notification that's been placed outside Holyrood in Edinburgh. As you can see, It says that further announcements will be made in due course. Let's return to Camilla Tominey, former royal editor for the Sunday Express, now associate editor of the Daily Telegraph, and the Prime Minister there expressing great sadness and condolences for the Queen, acknowledging the extraordinary public duty that Prince Philip did alongside the Queen, never outshining her, Camilla, always complimentary.
That's right. And I think we very much view him, don't we, at 99, as very much a man of his generation. Boris Johnson there mentioning the fact that he was mentioned in dispatches during the Second World War. He had to put his own military career in the Navy aside to support the Queen and become her liege man of life and limb. And of course, she described him as her strength and stay all these years. And he effectively decided that he needed to do something with his position in order to try and bring a greater good. And we saw that through the Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme, but equally in quite a lot of the reforms that happened behind palace gates. There was always this sense that, yes, the Queen is head of state, but he was head of the household and the ultimate patriarch. And as well, of course, working well beyond retirement age. That notion of him retiring at 95 or 96 in 2017, where most people would have been putting their feet up for 20 odd years, seemed extraordinary to those around him. But a very talented man, somebody who wrote a great deal of books as well on environmentalism and conservation. Prince of Wales has obviously inherited that gene from his father. But I think the effect on the Queen, of course, is going to be profound. The closest comparison we can perhaps make, and I remember it vividly, is during the Diamond Jubilee when Prince Philip was taken ill and there was a service at St Paul's Cathedral, and the Queen very purposefully walked down one side of the aisle as she went to take her seat in the pews. And that's because she was so used to having Prince Philip by her side. Even when he had been hospitalised that weekend, she walked in her position because she thought, or of course reflected on the fact that she always has a right-hand man by her side. So of course this is going to have a profound effect on her and the rest of the family, because Prince Philip was the head of that family.
Camilla, we appreciate you sharing your reflections on Prince Philip and the time that you spent with him on those many royal tours when you were the royal editor for the Sunday Express. Thank you very much. Here we see the flag flying at half-mast above Buckingham Palace, where the notice has been placed upon the gates with the statement reading from Buckingham Palace, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen has announced the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle." Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is here with me now, and a very long life on which we can reflect, one hallmarked by extraordinary public service, Nick.
Yes, hallmarked by service and duty and loyalty and all those rather old-fashioned characteristics that he and the Queen personify. And it is a moment of real sadness, obviously, for the Queen, for the royal family. She has lost her spouse of 73 years, almost unimaginable, isn't it? A period of 73 years of marriage. They met just before the outbreak of the Second World War, when she was just a teenage young woman, young child, really. But they stayed in touch during the war, and they were married. There are pictures of their marriage, married in 1947. And a keen sportsman, always very active, the Prince Philip, here playing polo. He only gave that up late in his life. And they started their family, Prince Charles there, born in 1948. And we think of the family, the loss of a father, the loss of the person who was really a stabilising and dominant feature within the family, the royal family. There were strains, of course, within that family, and sometimes in the 1950s they were particularly felt by the Duke of Edinburgh when he felt that he didn't have a role, but he found it and travelled widely there on one of those many travels around the world, but traditionally and customarily beside his wife, the Queen, quite literally a couple of paces behind her, but always in support, and at the same time developing a life and a career, if you like, of his own, developing interests in technology, in young people, in spiritual matters. And this is a man with a keen intellectual curiosity about things. He wrote several monographs investigating matters, but he will be remembered predominantly for his role in support of the Queen. She couldn't have done it without him, is what somebody who has known them both for decades said. An incalculable contribution. It was at the coronation that we see pictures of there that he made his oath, the first to pledge loyalty after the bishops, to be faith and truth I shall bear unto you. And I think it is fair to say that he has discharged his own coronation oath, the oath that he made to his wife, the Queen, on the occasion of the coronation in 1953. He has discharged that oath with distinction because he has always been there for her. All right, there were some bumpy patches in the 1950s, but once he found a role, because of course he had no constitutional significance, he found a role and he pursued that, whilst at the same time always being in support of his wife as they brought up their family. And there, I think, that from the Diamond Jubilee, it looks like, when he was well into his 90s, but always a vigorous man, both physically and mentally. Now, sometimes that got him into trouble. He would make his, what he would intend to be and hope to be humorous asides, and sometimes they didn't quite work out. Very often it was done to break the tension. You walk into a room and lots of people are there waiting to meet the Queen and the royals, and he would make what he would hope to be a wise crack, and sometimes it just fell flat. And he will be remembered in part for the gaffes. He once said, I think I'm going to cease putting my foot in my mouth. So he was aware of some of those gaffes, some of which, of course, were made on the many foreign visits that he made, most notably in China in the 1980s. But that should not overshadow the very real contribution that he made to the life of this nation and indeed to other nations around the world. We think of the World Wildlife Fund, the Duke of Edinburgh's award, which I think is active in something like 70 countries around the world. A remarkable life of service to his wife, to the Queen, to this, his adopted nation. He was born, of course, a prince of Greece. There was no Greek blood in him at all. He was essentially Danish and some German and Russian blood. And it is worth just remembering that he, like his wife, was a great-great-grandchild of Queen Victoria. So he was of royal blood, actually. Some people say he was more royal than the Queen, because both his parents were from a royal dynasty. But he came to this country because his parents' marriage broke up. They were banished from Greece, and he was brought up largely in this country, joined the Royal Navy, changed his name to Mountbatten, and had a distinguished record in the Second World War, after which came marriage to the then Princess Elizabeth and the start of a family, and then soon after that, the transition to her role as Queen and his role as consort. Never formally Prince Consort, but the companion of the Queen, and that role which he has discharged, I think, even critics of the royal family, I think, would accept that he has fulfilled that role with distinction. Not always a very easy role, a dominant personality forced into this supportive role, and it is in that role that he travelled the world and made his contribution.
Nick, for the moment, thank you very much. Do stay with us, though. The Scottish First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has released a statement. It says, "I am saddened by news that the Duke of Edinburgh has died. I send my personal and deepest condolences and those of the people of Scotland to Her Majesty the Queen and her family." We're joined now by the royal biographer and historian Robert Lacey. Thank you very much, Robert, for joining us. And I'm sure you, like everyone, will wish to reflect upon the extraordinary life, fascinating life in many ways, with so many facets to it that the Duke of Edinburgh managed to carve out when he became consort to the Queen.
Well, like many people watching, he's been a part of our life, hasn't he? Part of the Queen, and you know, we must all, of course, all of us be remembering and thinking now of the Queen, of whose life he has been such an integral part. Only last night there was the program on television, The Secret Life of the Queen, and the secret ingredient there of her emotional success and her public success and his historical success. It was always not a secret. It was Prince Philip, as Nick has just been saying, from very different background in some ways, but playing such a role in the life of the nation. I've been involved with The Crown, the TV series, and it was no accident that we decided to feature Prince Philip very strongly in the episode we made about the moon landings, and the way in which this captured in the 1960s Prince Philip's interest in science that Nick has been talking about, but then how he came to see that science will only take you so far in life, and he developed his intense personal religious faith, working with Dean Woods at Windsor to, in a particular sense, to give fresh spiritual strength to clergymen who were a bit jaded in their mission in life. And that proved the same thing for him. Such a thinking man. Again, Nick talked about the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme. Of such importance, obviously, to the young people whose lives were changed by it, but also bringing the monarchy into touch with everyday life in a fresh way. I would not want to diminish the wonderful achievement of the Queen in her reign, but so many of her fresh ideas and fresh initiatives came from this remarkable man.
Hundreds of public engagements that he carried out each year, amounting to tens of thousands over his lifetime, retiring well into his 90s just a few years ago. And of course, rather baffled by the constant press attention, wasn't he? That he seemed to be amused by the attention that he got when he was carrying out these engagements.
Yes, I think that was partly a very clever act. I think he hated the press as much as every other member of the royal family, but he had, and its intrusion, but he understood its purpose, and he adapted to that. It was his idea, of course, back in the 1960s, that the royal family should embark on its royal family film, which most of us thought was a great success, but which the family came to rather regret. And it's rather interesting, it's only actually now in the days of COVID, with the Queen going on Zoom and all the other members of the family going on Zoom, that we're actually getting in touch with the family in a personal way that he originally envisaged back there through television. You were talking just then of his public engagements, and I'm sure even as you said those words, viewers have a picture coming to their mind of his, yes, the sardonic smile you mentioned, often hands behind the back, often unfailingly a step behind Her Majesty, but always there clearly in the most supportive sense.
Let us show you the official statement, the official notice, if we can, being brought. We can just let you know that there has been an official notice put on the gates of Buckingham Palace. Here it is, being brought out with some ceremony, as you would expect, brought across the courtyard at the front of Buckingham Palace to the gates, to be placed there to notify the public of the passing of Prince Philip. On it, a statement from Buckingham Palace issued some time ago. It reads, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle." It goes on to say, "Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss." The First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, has also released a statement. He says, "Throughout his long and distinguished life, His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh served the Crown with selfless devotion and generosity of spirit. We offer our sincere condolences to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, his children and their families on this sad occasion." Well, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is here, and everyone touching on the same sorts of themes, Nick, of service and the support that he's given to the Queen. And of course, she is uppermost in everybody's minds because it is her husband who she has lost.
Yes, and the fact, as everybody is testifying, that he has made such a huge contribution to the success of this reign. People have referred to the fact that she said at the time of the Golden Jubilee, he is my strength and stay. Less remembered is that she returned to the theme at the time of the Diamond Jubilee, when she said, he is my constant strength and guide. Now, the Queen is very careful in her choice of words. So in both of those references, she referred to strength, to my guide. Now, she was saying that at the time of the Diamond Jubilee, when she'd been on the throne for 60 years. So for her to pay that kind of tribute, to use that kind of wording in reference to her husband, my strength and guide, and that, I think, gives a real clue to the significance that he played in her life in supporting and helping her to discharge the responsibilities as head of state. Remember, they're quite different in personality, in character. The Queen, traditionally and instinctively cautious and quite a reserved person. That was really quite a challenge for her back in the 1950s. Philip, by contrast, full of self-confidence, some would say actually rather arrogant, and quite a moderniser in the terms of the royal family, certainly back in the 1950s. An iconoclastic approach to things. But together, it really worked, this partnership between the two of them. He in support, this dominant personality in this constantly supporting role. But that is a role that he adapted to, adjusted to, and found actually that he was rather well suited to it, because he was utterly loyal in his belief in the importance of the role that the Queen was fulfilling and in his duty to support her. Now, he also went off. I think this was at the time, perhaps, of his. Well, here we are. We're back to the wedding back in 1947. This young couple, she in her early 20s, just 21, I think she was at the time of her wedding. He 5 years older than her, and a love match. You know, he means the world to her, is what one person who has known both of them for decades said to me. She's absolutely devoted to him, and he to her. And it was the importance, the solidity of that relationship, of their marriage, which was really so important in the success of the reign. So I think that he has made a huge contribution, both in terms of the nation and in terms of the support to her.
Nick, thank you very much. Well, Nick has been taking a look back at the Duke of Edinburgh's long and eventful life.
First after them, her husband, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who, with his hands between the hands of the Queen, becomes her liege man of life and limb and of earthly worship. In the name
At
of
the
God.
Queen's coronation, he was the first person after the bishops to pay homage to her. Philip knelt before his wife and pledged his loyalty.
Faith and truth I will bear unto you, live and die.
And so, rising, touches the crown upon her head and kisses her above. upon the left cheek.
As a male consort to a female sovereign, Philip had no constitutional significance. Yet no one was closer to the monarchy or of greater importance to the monarch than he was. By instinct he was a leader, yet Philip had always to take second place. By nature he spoke his mind, and that sometimes got him into trouble. Yet for decade after decade, his was the support that mattered most to the throne. Philip was born in Corfu in 1921. His family was part of European royalty. He was a prince of Greece, but his ancestors were largely Danish, German and Russian. Philip had a rootless childhood. His family was banished from Greece, his parents separated, and he was sent to Gordonston School in northern Scotland. The Spartan atmosphere there suited him. As the Second World War loomed, Philip was an 18-year-old Royal Navy cadet at Dartmouth.
His Majesty walking down the ranks of the cadets.
And when the King and Queen visited the college, they brought with them their 13-year-old daughter, Princess Elizabeth. According to witnesses, Philip showed off a great deal, but the meeting had made a deep impression on the princess. Philip served in the Royal Navy with distinction during the war. When the fighting ended, he started to escort Elizabeth to family gatherings. He changed his name to Philip Mountbatten and became a British citizen. The public realised there was a romance. Yet within Buckingham Palace, Philip was regarded with suspicion. One courtier wrote privately that he was rough, uneducated, and would probably not be faithful. But Elizabeth was deeply in love, and in the summer of 1947, the palace announced their engagement.
It is with the greatest pleasure that the King and Queen announced the betrothal of their dearly beloved daughter, the Princess Elizabeth, to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten, R.I.P.
On the 20th of November 1947, the newly created Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, stood within Westminster Abbey and exchanged marriage vows with the heir to the British throne.
I, Philip.
I, Philip.
Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary.
Take thee, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary.
To my wedded wife.
To my wedded wife.
Again and again the people called for Elizabeth and Philip. Again and again they joyfully responded.
In 1952, the couple set off on a tour of the Commonwealth. The King came with them to the airport. It was the last time they were to see King George VI, who, unknown to his daughter, was in the final stages of lung cancer.
It was a farewell. It was also, as events turned out, goodbye.
It was at a hunting lodge in Kenya that Philip told his wife of her father's death. Someone who was there said Philip looked as though half the world had dropped on him. They returned to London to lead the national mourning.
And now here is the Queen.
His wife was now Queen. Philip was there in support, but he was never given the title Prince Consort, and his role was undefined. He channeled some of his restless energy into a boisterous social life. He and a group of male friends met every week in rooms above a restaurant in London's Soho. There were long, convivial lunches, visits to nightclubs, and glamorous companions. By the 1960s, Philip's life was more settled. He and the Queen had completed their family with 2 more children, Andrew and Edward, who joined Charles and Anne, and he had found a new role for himself.
Is it the 18th we're due back now? 18th.
From his office in the palace, he promoted issues in which he had a personal interest.
40 minutes to get round the world. Well, it's going to be a bit of a rush. It may leave you a little bit muddled.
Yet diplomacy seemed alien to him. He urged British industry to pull its finger out and complained on American television that the royal family didn't have enough money.
Inevitably, if nothing happens, we shall either have to, we may have to move into smaller premises, who knows?
He blundered on a state visit to China with the Queen. He made what he thought was a private remark about slitty eyes. It was a diplomatic gaffe which dominated the headlines and added to his reputation for making misjudged remarks.
It's all right, Snip.
Yet Philip had a sharp, inquiring mind and was determined to make a contribution of his own. The groundbreaking 60s film Royal Family was made largely at his instigation because he felt it was time for the family to show a more human face to the world.
The salad is ready.
Good.
And for many years he toured the globe as president of the then World Wildlife Fund, speaking out about the need to conserve nature.
We depend on being part of the web of life. We depend on every other living thing on this planet, just as much as they depend on us.
He promoted technology, helped underprivileged children, and had a lifelong interest in spiritual issues. But his most lasting creation was the scheme named after him, the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, which encouraged young people to realise their potential.
To give young people a chance to discover their own abilities for themselves as an introduction to the responsibilities and interests of the grown-up world, and incidentally, to make new friends and have a great deal of fun and satisfaction in the process.
No decade was more difficult for the royal family than the 1990s. The death of Diana, Princess of Wales, was both a family tragedy and a moment of tension for the monarchy. It was the Queen to whom the country looked for public comfort. It was Philip to whom the Queen turned for private support.
And still Prince William, with his head hung, walking next to his grandfather.
It was Philip whose gentle encouragement had persuaded William and Harry to walk behind their mother's coffin to her funeral. And, contrary to his sometimes insensitive image, it had been Philip who'd taken the lead in trying to understand the domestic problems of his children, prompted perhaps by his own memories of what it's like to marry into the royal family. Philip remained physically active at an age when most men would have relished retirement. He went carriage driving, and he was still carrying out more engagements than many younger members of the family. Some he did alone, such as this visit to British troops in Iraq.
How did you get into this?
But most he did with his wife. He was the figure a few paces behind the Queen, always looking out for her, and often guiding children through the barriers to present their flowers to her. By the time of his 90th birthday in June 2011, celebrated at his insistence with little fanfare, he'd accepted that it was time to slow down a little.
I reckon I've done my bit. I want to enjoy myself for a bit now. With less responsibility, less frantic rushing about, less preparation, less trying to think of something to say. And on top of that, memories going. I can't remember names and things. Yes, I'm just sort of winding down.
There was little immediate evidence, though, of any winding down. Despite a serious health scare at Christmas 2011, when he had to be taken to hospital with a blocked coronary artery, he remained at the Queen's side for most of her Diamond Jubilee programme, which took them the length and breadth of the country. It wasn't until 2017 that the Duke, then aged 96, carried out his final solo engagement. It was a parade for the Royal Marines on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace. It was pouring with rain, but, as ever, duty took priority. He took his time meeting those on parade and taking the salute as the Marines marched past to bid him farewell. His life after that was much quieter, spent mostly at the Queen's estate at Sandringham. It was there in January 2019, while he was driving himself from the estate, that he survived a serious road accident. His vehicle overturned, he was badly shaken, and he surrendered his driving licence shortly afterwards. By now he was rarely seen in public. There were occasional appearances at family occasions such as weddings, yet he remained a supportive figure to the Queen and his family. Throughout his adult life, despite the formality of his position, Philip retained his own style of doing things. He made his own uncompromising mark on national life. He once summed up his approach in characteristically forthright fashion.
I've just done what I think is my best. I can't suddenly change my whole way of doing things. I can't change my interests. I can't change the way in which I react to things. It's part of that's somebody's style, and it's too bad. You've got to lump it.
Throughout all the monarchy's many ups and downs since the Second World War, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, the longest-serving consort in British history, was the restless outsider who put his wife and duty first. In doing so, he fulfilled his coronation oath of allegiance to Elizabeth, his Queen. Their marriage and his support were the essential foundations which underpinned the success of her reign. In a speech to celebrate their golden wedding anniversary, the Queen spoke of the debt that she and the country owed him.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
Buckingham Palace has announced the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, at the age of 99. Prince Philip was by far the longest-serving consort in British history, a role he shaped from the start.
Try and grow into it, and that was by trial and error. And there was no precedent. But if I asked somebody what you expect me to do, they all looked blank. They had no idea. Nobody had much idea.
He was 26 when he married the then Princess Elizabeth in 1947. Within 5 years, she would be Queen.
He has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
Tributes to Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, are coming in from around the world, and of course, many messages of condolences for Her Majesty the Queen. The Duke played a pivotal role as father and across the generations of the royal family. He'll be remembered for his support for the Queen for almost 70 years throughout her reign, at thousands of public events and, of course, in private. His career began in the Royal Navy, where he served during the Second World War, and ended after his wife's coronation. And also for encouraging millions of young people worldwide through the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, which he founded in the 1950s. In recent years, there had been many signs that the Duke of Edinburgh's health was declining. He'd been admitted to hospital a number of times throughout the last decade. He had returned home to Windsor on the 16th of March this year, after a month-long stay in hospital in London. His loss will be felt most keenly by Her Majesty the Queen, by the family and beyond. Good afternoon. Welcome to our viewers around the world for the news that is breaking today, because within the past hour, Buckingham Palace has announced the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. He was 99, due to celebrate his 100th birthday in June of this year. He was the longest-serving royal consort at any time in British history. In a formal statement, the palace said this: "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle." Further announcement will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss. A long and rich life for people to be reflecting on today, and of course on the contribution that Prince Philip made, not just in the UK and beyond. We'll come on to the life story, Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, in a moment. I think first we should pause and think about the sense of loss for the Queen and the royal family.
Yes, this is a moment of real national sadness. 2 months and 1 day short of what would have been his 100th birthday, a milestone that he was so determined to reach and that his family was so keen that he should achieve. A moment of sadness, most particularly, of course, for the Queen, losing her husband of 73 years, a bigger span of years than most of us can imagine, the longest-serving consort in British history. The Queen absolutely devoted to him, and I think it's perhaps not widely recognised what a team effort the reign of Elizabeth II has been, and the degree and the importance of the support given to her throughout her long reign by her husband, the one person to whom she could always turn, on whom she could always rely. There were difficult, frustrating periods in the 1950s. He had to adapt to this role, a supportive role, a dominant personality, a commanding personality that he was. He could have gone far in the Royal Navy, but he had to adapt and find a role for himself, and he did that. And apart from the sadness of the Queen, which will be profound, though of course she will continue in the role as Queen, there will be no question of her now withdrawing or retiring from that role. There will be great sadness within the royal family, and we must remember that they have lost a father or a grandfather or even a great-grandfather. And we remember the role that the Duke played within the family, the dominant role within that family, and a source for all his abrasiveness, for all his contrariness on occasions. He could also show great sensitivity, particularly to those marrying into the royal family. And I think it would be fair to say that he is probably one of the most influential outsiders to marry into the British royal family, alongside the Queen Mother and Princess Diana. And he showed that sensitive side to his nature in the efforts that he made to save the marriage of his son Prince Charles and Diana, Princess of Wales. And there is now this gap in national life. He's been less evident, of course, in recent years since his retirement from active royal life in 2017. But for so many decades, he was a colourful character. He was a force within the life of this nation and indeed of other nations around the world, and particularly within the Commonwealth. And he has been absolutely central to the success of this reign. I think it is fair to say that the success and the stability of Queen Elizabeth's reign owes so much to the success and the stability of her marriage to Prince Philip, a man of royal blood himself, both he and the Queen, great-great-grandchildren of Queen Victoria. He knew instinctively what was required in that role, notwithstanding the fact that he was an outsider. He was, by character, a restless individual, but he wasn't the product of Eton and the Guards and Oxford or Cambridge. He was a prince of Greece, though there was no Greek blood in him, banished from that country, had a rootless childhood, and the Queen fell in love with him. And, well, the rest, as they say, is history. He has discharged his duty to her, the duty that he pledged at the time of the coronation, to be faith and truth I shall bear unto you. And he found a role for himself, an important role, and made a significant contribution in his own right to the life of this nation.
We will talk and have plenty of time a little later, Nick, to talk about the colourful character, the slightly abrasive character at times, as you say, the energetic person that he was, the man of ideas, the man who modernised the royal family in many ways. Can I just pick up once again on where this leaves Her Majesty? We know of her resilience. We know of her sense of duty. We know, as you say, that there'll be a steadfast determination to carry on with that duty, and yet there will be a weakening, surely, of the Queen's own sense of this, what was a team effort.
Well, she will miss him hugely. It will not, though, have come as a surprise, his death, for somebody 2 months short of his 100th birthday. There will be, of course, an emotional shock that finally he has passed away. There will be deep, deep sadness. But I think that the Queen's attitude will be that she will continue with her duty. We shouldn't forget that 10 years ago now, Prince Philip had a serious heart episode when he was rushed to Papworth Hospital. And I'm told by people who do know that on that occasion she thought that she had lost him.
Right.
So she will have, over the years, I think, as every couple does when they are in their 90s, they brace themselves for the moment of when their partner, when their spouse passes away. It is particularly accentuated, perhaps, in the case of this couple, because of the very solitary, lonely position in which the Queen, as head of state, finds herself. So in that position, she will have relied more than usually on the support of the one person to whom she could always turn. But I think that she will continue. There will be a period of great sadness. The rest of the royal family will, of course, rally around and be there, notwithstanding their own sadness. They have lost, as I say, fathers and grandfathers. But it will not come, I think, as a surprise to them, because, as we saw when the Duke left hospital on the 16th of March, he looked very frail then.
Nick, we'll talk a little more later. Thank you so much for now. If you're just joining us, wherever you're watching around the world, this is our special programme from BBC News on the day that Buckingham Palace announced the sad news that His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, has died at the age of 99. We'll have all the tributes that come in for you. We'll be talking again about where this leaves the royal family, and Nick there hinting at the fact that, of course, the prime duty of the family will continue, but the balance within it will have changed after this news. We'll talk a little bit about as well his contribution, very big contribution to public life in the United Kingdom over many years, since that marriage to Princess Elizabeth back in 1947. So it's a long and a rich life that we are talking about today, not without its controversy at times. Let's be clear about that as well. So Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, has been considering all of this, and he looks back now at Prince Philip's life.